One of my favorite directors is Guillermo del Toro, from movies like Pan's Labyrinth to Blade 2, and of course the amazing Hellboy movies. There's just something about his style and storytelling that has always captivated me. The dark gothic horror, the fantasy, the monsters. He has a style that's uniquely his own. It was in 1997, however, that I would get my first glimpse into just what kind of terror del Toro had to offer. In 1942, science fiction writer and publisher Donald A. Wollheim wrote a short story called Mimic. The story featured an unnamed narrator recalling his experiences with a reclusive man in black, a man who could always be heard hammering away on sheets of metal, avoided women, and mostly kept to himself. So basically me. Years after the man's death, it's discovered he wasn't a man at all, but a giant insect that had evolved to mimic the human form in order to hide among its greatest threat. The story first appeared in the December 1942 issue of Astonishing Stories, and more than 50 years later, it would catch the eye of a young Guillermo del Toro. Guillermo del Toro was coming off his first feature film Kronos, a unique take on vampire mythology, when Mira, the studio founded by Bob and Harvey Weinstein, came knocking, just not in the typical way Harvey usually comes knocking.
Open the door, Sarah. It's Daddy.
Del Toro was trying to make the jump to Hollywood, and the opportunity to work for Miramax was simply too good to turn down. The Weinsteins initially hired him to direct a 30-minute segment for a sci-fi anthology called Light Years. The film was meant to showcase several young up-and-coming directors, including Bryan Singer, Gary Fleder, and Danny Boyle. While Del Toro was writing and sketching ideas for his short, the studio approached him with another idea. Instead of a 30-minute anthology segment, why not turn Mimic into a full-length feature? Del Toro wasn't convinced there was enough story in Donald Wollheim's original short to justify a feature film, but the expanded runtime would also allow him to make the story his own. In the end, Light Years never happened. Del Toro's Mimic and Gary Fleder's Imposter eventually became full-length features, while Danny Boyle's segment Alien Love Triangle, starring Courtney Cox and Heather Graham, was the only short ever filmed. Outside of a handful of festival screenings though, it has never been publicly released. With Mimic now becoming a full-length production, Del Toro quickly got to work. Unfortunately for him, he had absolutely no idea just how miserable the experience was about to become. Considering how unknown he was at the time, I mean he wasn't exactly the Oscar-winning filmmaker most people know today, Del Toro and the Weinsteins began butting heads almost immediately. What Del Toro envisioned was a dark gothic horror film, a story about humanity's own hubris, evolution, societal exploitation, and religious desecration. That was in stark contrast to the more traditional B-movie creature feature that the Weinsteins had in mind. While Del Toro was writing, Bob and Harvey Weinstein kept pushing to make changes. One of the biggest involved the creatures themselves. Del Toro originally imagined the mimics as highly evolved bark beetles, an insect capable of carrying a deadly bacteria that humanity desperately needed to eliminate. The producers, however, felt the creatures should be giant cockroaches instead, arguing that cockroaches were something every New Yorker had encountered at one point or another. Del Toro hated the idea. To him, giant cockroaches belonged in Z-grade monster movies, and that wasn't the kind of film he was trying to make. He argued his case, but it was a losing battle. Everyone else in the room loved the cockroach idea. Things only became more ridiculous when Del Toro and creature designer Ty Ruben Ellingson began developing the mimics. After months of work, the studio contacted Del Toro with what might be one of the strangest notes I've ever heard. They asked him, "Why do they look like bugs?" Did they not read the script? Were they not there for the discussions about whether they should be beetles or cockroaches? According to Del Toro himself on the Blu-ray commentary, "I said, but of course, we've been developing the creatures for a year and a half. You've seen the designs, you've seen the maquettes, you've seen the clay molds, you've seen everything, and they are bugs. Well, can you make them look more like aliens?" I said, "I don't want to make them more like aliens." The notes only became stranger from there. The studio wanted bigger teeth, visible gums, crazy hair, which is amazing considering the mimics don't have teeth, didn't have gums, and they definitely weren't supposed to have hair. Somehow, after surviving all those executive notes, Del Toro finally arrived at a creature design that he was genuinely happy with. Unfortunately, the arguments were only just beginning. As the dailies started coming in, Bob and Harvey Weinstein became increasingly frustrated. This wasn't the movie they thought they'd hired Guillermo del Toro to make. According to multiple reports, Bob Weinstein would regularly come down to the set to criticize Del Toro's work, telling him the movie wasn't scary enough, demanding script changes, and throwing out increasingly bizarre suggestions, even at one point asking him if he even knew how to direct. Eventually, according to Peter Biskind's 2004 book, Down and Dirty Pictures, things reached a breaking point. Bob Weinstein allegedly pulled Del Toro aside and fired him. Somehow, that wasn't even the craziest part. According to Biskind's account, Weinstein then instructed Del Toro to tell star Mira Sorvino that he was leaving the production voluntarily. Sorvino apparently saw right through it. Fresh off winning the Academy Award for Mighty Aphrodite, a Miramax release no less, she reportedly confronted Weinstein and made it clear that Del Toro was the reason she'd signed on to the project to begin with. With support from her then boyfriend, Quentin Tarantino, Del Toro was ultimately allowed to remain as director. Even after Del Toro managed to stay on the project, the studio continued interfering right up until the film's release. One of the biggest issues involved the second unit. The Weinsteins brought in a crew to shoot additional footage, but much of it simply didn't match what Del Toro had already filmed. The lighting was different, the colors were different, even the tone felt different. Guillermo del Toro has always been an incredibly hands-on filmmaker, rarely relying on second unit crews unless absolutely necessary. It wasn't until the 2011 director's cut that he was finally able to remove much of that footage and reshape Mimic into something much closer to what he'd originally envisioned. As Del Toro himself put it,
"And you say to me you hated it, I'll assume it because this incarnation I own. I really say this is the movie I wanted."
After Mimic disappointed at the box office, Del Toro was so disillusioned with the experience that he nearly walked away from Hollywood altogether. He wouldn't direct another American studio film until Blade 2 in 2002. To say that experience was different would be an understatement. Interestingly, one of the few things that kept Del Toro sane during the making of Mimic was a stack of comic books featuring a large red demon with a giant stone hand, but that's a story for another time. In 2017, while attending the BFI London Film Festival, Del Toro reflected on the experience. He joked, "Two horrible things happened in the late 90s. My father was kidnapped, and I worked with the Weinsteins. I know which one was worse. The kidnapping made more sense. I knew what they wanted. There was one problem. When Del Toro's father was kidnapped in Mexico, the ransom demand was $1 million. Del Toro simply didn't have that kind of money. Kronos had been critically acclaimed, but it certainly didn't make him rich. You might think the Hollywood studio currently employing him would step in to help, but yeah, not exactly. Instead, it was his good friend James Cameron. Cameron personally helped Del Toro secure the money, drove him to the bank, and even helped arrange professional negotiators. Years later, after Titanic swept the Academy Awards, Cameron reportedly confronted Harvey Weinstein over how Del Toro had been treated during Mimic. According to Cameron, Harvey came up glad-handing me, talking about how great they were for the artist, and I just read him chapter and verse about how great I thought he was for the artist based on my friend's experience, and that led to an altercation. Now, considering when this story became public, you could argue James Cameron was simply joining the pile-on against Harvey, but personally, considering Harvey's reputation and James Cameron's reputation, I can absolutely believe that James Cameron nearly hit him with an Oscar. But after all that drama, all that studio interference, and all that nonsense surrounding what was supposed to be a relatively small, gothic monster movie, just how good or bad is Mimic? And if you think I'm going to compare the theatrical cut with the director's cut, think again, boyo. If Guillermo del Toro tells me this is the version he wants me to watch, then as a loyal del Toro fan, this is the version I'm watching. Mimic begins in possibly the most wholesome way possible. A terrible virus is spreading throughout New York and killing all the children. Wait, that's not wholesome? This hospital looks suspiciously like the mental hospital from In the Mouth of Madness. What if it was Sutter Kane all along? Peter Man, which is the most obvious name for a mimic, I mean, man, really? It's like they're not even trying, has called in entomologist Susan Tyler, because it seems this horrific disease has been spread by cockroaches. Susan gets to work hybridizing a new insect known as the Judas breed, an insect carrying an enzyme that will kill all the cockroaches and definitely not turn into giant terrifying monsters.
I don't think I need to tell you New Yorkers just how resilient the common cockroach is.
They were killing your children! Sometime later, Peter and Susan are married and decide to get a head start on making some kids of their own. I mean, nothing turns Peter on more than seeing himself on TV. I don't think I could do it with a disgusting bug sitting on the sink, though. A few years later, and a pastor, I think, is being chased by something. Though this might be the worst trap Kevin McAllister has ever thrown together. A young autistic boy named Chewie, no relation to Chewbacca, who has a thing for shoes, notices the dead man and whatever the hell that thing is. Great, so first we had clowns in sewers, then liver-eating mutants, and now giant bug monsters. Remember the good old days when it was just chuds? Peter visits his wife at the museum where I guess she works. The two have a discussion about fertility issues as they're having trouble conceiving. Interestingly though, when Peter hands her a bottle of something, she looks at him and says it's not natural. Oh, you mean like the perfectly natural insect you bioengineered? What's funny about Mira Sorvino and Jeremy Northam is they have pretty good chemistry on screen, but apparently behind the scenes they hated each other's guts. Peter was also originally supposed to be played by Andre Braugher of Brooklyn Nine-Nine fame, but that was shot down because Harvey Weinstein felt audiences weren't yet ready for a mixed-race couple. As if people didn't have enough reasons to hate the man. Holy crap, would you look at that? This guy's a redhead. Oh, and we've got ourselves a young Josh Brolin, I guess. It feels odd now, but there was a time when Josh Brolin was barely a supporting name. So the church where the Chinese man fell from earlier is housing a bunch of slaves forced to make good old American products. Considering how disgusting everything is though, I'm not sure I would be touching my face.
Piece of shit on the ceiling, huh? Figure that one out.
I get there's only one toilet in the place, but there's gotta be a better way of doing this, no? One lady rambles on about a dark angel, and I agree. I also wish it got a third season. Susan runs into a couple rambunctious kids just looking to make a quick buck. Don't judge them too harshly. They could be selling worse things than bugs. I remember when I was a kid, I tried selling garter snakes. Never did get a buyer. Susan also buys a very special bug from the kids, which this guy seems to be pretty interested in. What exactly was she trying to accomplish there? She quickly realizes that the mystery bug might actually be the Judas breed that she released just 3 years prior. But how could this be possible? The Judas breed were created to be sterile. It's almost like sitting next to dinosaur bones earlier in the movie was symbolic. As the great Dr. Ian Malcolm once said, life finds a way. Holy shit, it's Batman! I guess he just wanted the bug more. Seriously though, what the hell is even that? Susan drops on Peter that the bug she bought was a baby Judas breed. You know, the bugs that were supposed to die. I'm sure it's nothing though. It's not like introducing a foreign insect that could upset the ecological balance could do any harm. Peter and Susan go down into the subway to locate where the kids found the bug. I really hope this kid grew into his teeth. Before they can look for anything, they're stopped by Officer Charles S. Dutton, or Leonard as he's known in the movie. I'm actually a pretty big fan of Dutton's going back to his role in Alien 3, which I unapologetically love. Yes, even the theatrical cut.
Lady, who am I talking to now? You or him?
You're talking to me, okay? You're talking to me.
Come on now, Susan, you know talking to a cop is man's work. You should be home drinking weird bottled nun urine or whatever the hell it was. Susan makes friends with little Chewie, who has a talent for mimicking the sounds of people's shoes. Meanwhile, the kids have gone on another bug hunt. There's gotta be a limit on how many bugs Susan's gonna buy off them, no? I'm sure there's nothing terrifying down this hallway. Uh-oh, looks like they've pissed off Darkman. I don't remember Darkman eating dogs, though. I wouldn't worry too much, they're kids. It's not like kids ever die in a horror movie. Mimic. You could have warned me first. Back with Chewie, who decides to go check out the creepy abandoned chapel next door, full of terrifying giant monster bugs. Considering what we just saw, I'm less convinced he's gonna be okay. Seems like the bugs are just good old country folk who enjoy themselves a little spoon playing. What's interesting about this scene is how it plays into some of the themes Del Toro originally envisioned for the movie. This idea that God has turned his back on humanity and is now favoring the mimics as his new favorite creation. I mean, seeing the destroyed crucifix of Jesus and the other statues all wrapped up like the pupa or cocoon of an insect, it's almost like they've taken one of humanity's oldest symbols of faith and replaced it with one of their own. Also, the name itself, the Judas breed, is a clear connection to Judas, the follower who turned his back on Jesus. It's almost like Susan bred these creatures as an ally to humanity, but when needed most, they've now turned on humans. It's also quite fascinating that the Judases were created with the inability to breed, but somehow managed to evolve past it, while their creator Susan is unable to, or at least struggling to conceive herself. There's a deleted scene with Susan and Peter that goes deeper into their wishes to have a child that I think, had Del Toro been able to do what he wanted to, would have been a bigger focus of the movie. In fact, this isn't even the first time Del Toro has connected insects with religion. 4 years earlier in Kronos, one of the characters asks,
¿Quién dice que los insectos no sean las criaturas favoritas de Dios? Cristo caminó sobre el agua, igual que un mosquito.
It's a bizarre line on its own, but looking back after Mimic, it almost feels like Del Toro had already been wrestling with this idea that insects may have become God's preferred creation over mankind. But who cares about all of that, because we now have the first movie role of Norman Reedus. He and some other sanitation workers discover something clogging the system, and it's a disgusting baby mimic. I'm just glad it wasn't the Fluke Man again. Meanwhile, Susan is admiring her stomach after eating 5 bean burritos from Taco Bell. She's actually taking a pregnancy test, though before she can actually see the results, is called away to check on this bug. What's fascinating though is that the audience sees something Susan doesn't. The pregnancy test appears to be positive. Susan throws it away, believing she's still infertile, but Del Toro lets us see the result. If Del Toro really intended the Judas breed to represent humanity seemingly being replaced by a new creation, then this moment almost feels like a quiet reassurance that humanity hasn't been abandoned after all. In earlier drafts, the mimics were supposed to be evolved from bark beetles, like mentioned earlier. However, there was no bioengineering or explanation for how the mimics came to be. It was the Weinsteins who forced Del Toro to give the evolution and explanation, hence the Judas breed. Del Toro originally imagined the mimics as something that had simply evolved on their own. That idea is way more frightening. Humanity isn't being punished for creating monsters, it's simply discovering it may no longer be nature's, or perhaps even God's favored creation. And maybe I'm reaching a bit, but considering how much Del Toro loves his religious imagery, it makes me wonder if it's really a coincidence that the positive result forms a cross. Anyway, enough of my TED Talk on bug theology. Manny, Chewie's father, notices his son has gone missing, and there's only one place he could possibly be, in this terrifying underground tunnel system, obviously. Manny calls the police over his missing son, but like always, they're pretty useless, so I guess he's gonna have to track down Mr. Funny Shoes himself. Peter and his band of merry men find some ancient hieroglyphics. Well, they're actually drawings left by homeless people, warning everyone of what's going on. This was something else that Del Toro tried expanding on more with his director's cut. The idea that the undesirables of society, the people that live in the shadows and most of us ignore, would be the first to fall prey to this new higher being on the food chain. Just like with the Chinese folk earlier who were screaming about dark angels.
Why are you asking me if I've ever seen some shit like this before? Do I look like I've seen some shit like this before?
I would love to know how they didn't smell the mimic shit before they saw it. Back at the subway, Susan is waiting for Peter when she finally notices something odd about her bugs. This is the worst Mad Magazine fold-in I've ever seen. You know, whether or not there are giant monster bugs, I still wouldn't want to be down there.
Do you have the time? Sir, the time?
I'm going to assume he doesn't. Alright, so it's a giant monster bug. What's the worst that could happen? Meanwhile, the guys get separated when a platform collapses. Josh Brolin leaves to find help because Goonies never say die. Susan awakes from her little bug ride, but makes sure to show off her wedding ring. You know, just so the mimics know she's already seeing someone. She manages to defend herself from the creature and falls down through a metal grate of some kind. So much for these creatures being intelligent though, it could have easily lifted the grate. Thanos in the meantime attempts to climb through a grate of his own. Why didn't the Avengers just use mimics to fight Thanos' army? Leonard starts to sing, which is probably the worst thing you can do when giant bug monsters are around, though to be fair, he doesn't know they exist yet. The guys run into Manny, who just happened to find Susan, though we never actually got to see that meeting take place. They gotta hustle though, because one of the mimics are very angry. I would love to know what kind of handgun Leonard is using, because he fires close to 30 rounds without ever needing to reload. Susan discovers that her Frankenstein creation has lungs, which is definitely something insects aren't supposed to have.
The Judas evolved to mimic its predator.
Timothy Chalamet?
Us.
Oh. Manny starts flipping his wig over what she's done, but I love how Leonard just eggs him on like, yeah, this is all her fault. No time for the blame game, guys, because even more mimics have come for their friend. Susan realizes the bugs are drawn to the scent of Leonard's blood, so she rips out some of the Judas's scent glands and begins rubbing them all over the windows and on Leonard's leg. I'm sorry, but at that point, I'd rather just let the mimics eat me. The group comes up with a plan to get the subway car they're on moving again. Peter decides Manny and himself should go, but not without rubbing some more of that bug goo on themselves. Whoa, watch out, Mr. Bug Monster. I guess eyesight means nothing to these things? While Peter's doing that, Manny finds his son Chewie, who seems to be in pretty good spirits, all things considered. Susan starts theorizing that the Judases likely only have one fertile male, since she crossbred termites, which are known for only having one, and mantids, or praying mantises, which are generally solitary creatures. The whole mimic aspect actually comes from the mantid side. They're known for mimicking leaves or other predators as an ambush tactic, or to protect themselves when something else sees them as a snack. You can kind of see some mantid qualities in the design of the Judases, but it was the higher-ups that wanted them to look like cockroaches. So it's a weird compromise of looking more like a cockroach, but story-wise, there's something else entirely. Back with Manny, who makes the very poor mistake of wiping off his face. Unfortunately, Chewie's new friends aren't nearly as friendly as he thought. Originally, Manny was supposed to have a much different fate. In Del Toro's original script, Manny was supposed to find Chewie, but also what Del Toro called the Wall of... a wall full of Judas females and one male who was currently in the process of impregnating one of the females with a very human-looking male appendage. Before the creatures could kill Manny, he was going to take his own life with his razor blade right after saying, "God cannot see this." The studio was absolutely disgusted by the scene and told Del Toro he would have to change it. There was also another shot nearing the finale where the male would still be connected to one of the females while they chased after the survivors in tandem. That scene was also nixed because it was seen as being way too graphic. Back with Susan, who decides to see what's taken the guys so long. Well, I don't think Manny will be needing this rosary anymore. Peter gets the subway car moving again, which lasts a good 20 feet or so. He leaves and finds Susan and Chewie, but I would imagine their smell glands would have worn off by now. Leonard starts to sing so he can draw the attention away from the others, since he is bleeding pretty badly at this point. I don't know what it is with this guy, but he seems to enjoy fighting giant bug monsters one-on-one. For a second there, I thought Roland Emmerich was directing this. Peter sends Susan and Chewie to the surface in a dumbwaiter, while he finds a way to fight off the king. It's almost like an inverse of the ending to Aliens. Well, it would have been if the king kept after Peter instead of switching to Susan. Peter finds himself in the nest with thousands and thousands of Judases. Nothing a lighter and a leaky gas pipe can't fix. The lighter not working is one of the best oh shit moments that I've seen in any movie. The Judases all stand around and look at Peter, giving him enough time to cause a spark and kill all of them in one fell swoop. Well, them and however many New Yorkers he just incinerated. Susan somehow survives the explosion, though Chewie's nowhere to be found. Oh wait, there he is.
God. It's the mail.
I'm glad she explains this is the male Judas for all the idiots that haven't been paying attention. Susan cuts her hand with Manny's rosary so she can trick the male into getting run over by a subway car. I would love to see the expression on the operator when this giant bug monster just gets obliterated. The original confrontation was supposed to be much darker than what we got here. In Del Toro's original treatment, when the male faces her, he transforms into a perfectly formed naked man. Not just sort of resembling a man, I mean a perfect man. The creature then was going to look at her and tell her to leave, signifying the bugs were now in control and humanity was doomed. There wasn't going to be some big final chase or showdown. The whole thing was going to end on a downer note that the bugs won and we lost. The studio obviously did not like this idea and forced Del Toro into making a happy ending. And what we got for the happy ending was Susan being reunited with Peter telling her that she's pregnant since he found the pregnancy test just before descending into the tunnels. What I find interesting about this revelation is the fact that Susan is still holding on to Manny's rosary, which I think ties back into the themes discussed earlier. Though does this mean they've now adopted Chewie? Because they're definitely acting like family. Also, there was an alternate ending which ended on a happy note, but as Susan and Peter embraced, Chewie hears what sounds like Mr. Funny Shoes, suggesting the mimics are now walking amongst the humans, and maybe we are doomed. I remember being 10 or 11 when commercials were playing for Mimic, and they looked terrifying. The quick shots of the cloaked figures were so creepy and yet so mysterious. It wouldn't be until the movie came out on VHS rental when I'd finally get to see it, but I loved every second of it. The thing is, now that I'm older, I actually find the movie less interesting once the mimics reveal themselves. There's something infinitely scarier about the monster when it's cloaked in shadows, and you're not quite sure what the hell you're seeing. Still though, the movie is enjoyable, and I wonder what the movie would have really been like had Del Toro been able to bring his actual vision to life. If he tried to make the movie today, I have my doubts that he'd have any pushback, but it does sort of put Mimic in the category of what ifs. What if the Weinsteins hadn't thrown their weight around and messed with Del Toro's vision? Maybe it could have been one of the greatest horror movies ever made. Or maybe it still would have been an interesting but ultimately uneven movie. While Del Toro's career definitely turned around after Mimic flopped, for its star Mira Sorvino, it was almost the exact opposite. According to director Peter Jackson, Mira Sorvino was on a list of actresses along with Ashley Judd for a role in The Lord of the Rings. However, Harvey Weinstein told Jackson that both women were a nightmare to work with, and because of this, they had their names removed from consideration. However, it was later revealed this was all a smear campaign by Weinstein, who was butthurt that Sorvino turned down his advances. Harvey Weinstein denied those allegations, obviously, but looking at how Sorvino's career changed afterward, it's understandable why so many people believe Peter Jackson's account. In 2020, a Mimic television series was announced, with, I shit you not, director Paul W.S. Anderson attached to direct the pilot and produce the show. This series was going to be a reboot of the movie, though when asked if she would return, Mira Sorvino said she couldn't because of scheduling conflicts and because she just hated cockroaches. But let's be real, considering everything she went through, she probably just didn't want to be reminded of the whole experience. Anderson had hoped to start filming the series in 2021, but since then, everything has gone pretty cold, and the project is likely, and hopefully, dead. The film itself is a decent little monster movie that tries to have more to say than the typical horror film, but because of studio and executive meddling, it never really got the chance it deserved. If you're interested in something a bit different, I do recommend the movie, but only the director's cut. It might not be perfect, but at least it stays truer to Del Toro's vision. But what about you? Have you seen Mimic, and if so, what do you think of it? Let me know down in the comments. Anyways, that's all for today. I hope you're not melting because it is a scorcher outside, and stay spooky. Huge thanks to all my channel members, you're the real MVPs of the Spooky Squad. Your support helps keep the lights flickering and the monsters fed. If you'd like to join up and help support the channel, check out the join button below. But no pressure, just watching and liking helps a ton too.